This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And greetings once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. As always, I must implore you, if you're listening to us, whatever flavor of podcast channel you prefer, Apple, Spotify, what have you, please follow us. Watching the video version on our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button below me, smash the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. The gentleman I am interviewing today is darn smart. I've got Dr. Peter Laufer. May I call you Peter, sir? Is that okay?
Please do. And I will call you Mike if that's okay, publisher.
You can call me anything you want, but of course, Mike is my name. Peter, first of all, there's a chance you and I were hanging around in DC around the same time. I'm a GW grad. And I was a disc jockey at WEAM in Washington my senior year. So 1978 to about late 79, I was on the WEAM team, AM radio in DC. When were you at American University? And when were you program director of the News Talk in DC?
Yeah, so a little bit later. That was in the early 80s, but we still may have crossed paths because I was at the now defunct Mutual Broadcasting System at about the time you were at WEAM. And then, yes, I was at AU and NBC in the early 80s.
Well, I went to GW. We used to just scream across to you guys, go, hey, you. Never mind. Anyway, Jimmy Carter's son was in my class, by the way, as well. But we're not here to talk about the DC days and radio, although that's part of your background. Peter Laufer, PhD, is an award-winning journalist, professor of journalism in the James N. Wallace Chair of Journalism at the University of Oregon. So we're speaking to you on the other coast. You authored the book Slow News. We just did a wonderful piece on that. That's a 2014 book. Correct me if I'm wrong. That first came out in Italian.
Bizarrely, it first came out in Italian just because I happened to be in Milan talking to a publisher doing another one of my books in Italian, and she liked the idea. Slow Food came from Italy, so it launched there.
Right.
It's great fun.
But some of your other books are just mind-boggling. You chased butterflies to publish The Dangerous World of Butterflies. You chased turtles for Dreaming in Turtle. You wrote a book about the relationship of humans and animals called Forbidden Creatures, and No Animals Were Harmed. And you are, I guess we could call you, in my religion, we call you a mensch, but you're kind of that Renaissance person. You've been a radio program director, news director, you've worked for Legacy Media, and you've taught for years, obviously at a college level. But I want to talk to you about so much. I don't just want to talk about, of course, your concept of slow news in our very fast-paced world, but rumor has it, and I know it just kind of broke, that since you're at the University of Oregon, you've been talking to Gannet about the possibility of getting the Register-Guard moved from that corporate entity to become part of the university. And that's just, these discussions are starting to take place. Am I correct, sir?
You are absolutely correct. And it's arrogance and combined with civic responsibility, bomb throwing, and a carnival act, I think, that gets us to this point. And I wrote an op-ed out of just abject frustration for our local weekly, Eugene Weekly, that said, and I've got show and tell for you here. I mean, this is today's Register-Guard, or this is the remnants of the Register-Guard for today. This was, as you undoubtedly know, and those who are watching and listening to us know, the Register-Guard was a powerhouse regional newspaper.
Oh, it was the paper of pretty much of the state, right? It was out of Eugene, and it was owned. It was a major paper, correct?
No question, owned by the Baker family for almost 100 years before they sold it to the precursor of now Gannet, and so this is today's. So first of all, just how thin would you like it? First, here is
it looks like 5 or 6 pages for those of you.
So now you've got 8 in the A section,
In the A section.
You get a taste of the demographics because it's a full page on walk-in bathtubs, but here's that. But it's easy to criticize. There's nothing wrong with walk-in bathtubs, and there's certainly nothing wrong with getting a full-page ad. But it undoubtedly is a national Gannett buy. Has nothing to do with Eugene. Neither does the newspaper. There's one story. The lead story happens to be about my university, the University of Oregon, because we are building a new campus in Portland. With all appropriate respect to the reporter, it's basically regurgitated PR material from the university. But that, Mike, that is the only thing that can pass as a local news story on this Monday edition of this newspaper that cost, when I bought it downtown, some ludicrous amount of money that what was it? I can't remember now. I think it was $2.99.
Well, hopefully the university will reimburse you for that.
I'm going to put in for it, no question. But one after another, there are these dated national stories that add zero to any kind of build out of civic responsibility, civic understanding, or even just local gossip. There's nothing in here. There's the police blotter isn't here. And then here is the masthead. No names. I mean, and the second section is sports. There's one local sports story about our
so you basically have two local stories. The rest is just filler from tell you what, let's talk about that and slow news and the industry in general. And I do want to get some questions in about the youth of today and their opinions of this industry they're entering. Let's do all that on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
All right, Peter, let's start first with because there's four separate topics I have notes for that I want to discuss with you. Let's go back to this Register-Guard idea of yours, this manifesto you wrote, where you see a brand. This is similar to my story. Remember, E&P was languishing, editor and publisher, with a California owner who saved it from extinction when Nielsen was going to shut it down. Got to give Duncan McIntosh down in Orange County some credit because he had the Alternative Weekly there, picked this thing up. But as he kept calling it during our due diligence, when I was looking to take it over, kept calling it his ugly stepchild. Didn't give it a lot of love. I saw a brand I could bring back. I don't think of E&P as a magazine, a brand. In your opinion, the Register-Guard now a shadow of itself? I mean, we all know what Gannet. I mean, it's less and less and less and less content. Is that brand still have legs? Do you see? Are you just some? Let me just finish the question. Are you just some old guy like me who just wants it back? I mean, come on.
So the answer is yes and no. And
Okay.
and the yes side of the question, of the answer to your question, is that when you have a legacy brand like the Register-Guard in a place like Eugene, and this is replicated all over the country, of course, then there is a demographic that misses it. And that would, I believe, feel a sense of renewal and vigor to see that which they grew up with, that which they threw to doorsteps from their red Schwinn bicycles, alive again. But your point is well taken, and is probably the direction this idea will go if it turns into anything beyond an idea. That why burden oneself with trying to negotiate with Gannet, although I've had gracious, lovely conversations with executives there, why burden oneself with the baggage when one can start anew?
Well,
However,
you told me you had a 3-hour conversation with my friend Ken Doctors. He's been on this program 3 times, teasing Lookout Local in Santa Cruz. He revealed the model here first. And then we just interviewed him about 2 years in, where his head's at. And I kept yelling at him, you were in this industry for decades. Why the heck didn't you infuse Lookout Local, this new wonderful digital startup concept, within a legacy brand to resurrect it? And he opted for a brand new startup. I'm okay with where you're headed. I think some of these brands have legs. You see what I'm saying? There's still they still got street cred. I hope I'm making sense here. So
you're making perfect sense here. There's street cred. There's also the morgue. There is whatever is left in the files there that might be of value.
Email database, social media following.
All of that, bringing people back to something that disappeared or is all but disappeared, and have them want to be participatory in reinvigorating it. But what Ken is doing in Santa Cruz, and he told me during a long meeting we had in his offices, and it was so great to see the vibrancy of his newsroom there in Santa Cruz. What he's thinking of, as he undoubtedly talked about with you, Mike, is pushing this thing out elsewhere. So maybe because we are generating out of this off-the-wall idea, give the dying newspaper a second chance by giving it to the university, maybe there's some hybrid of this. Maybe it's a startup. Maybe it's rebuilding the Register-Guard. But what's refreshing about what's happened here is that op-ed in the Weekly has generated enthusiasm.
The community this is why we're discussing it, because you wrote an op-ed as just like a manifesto, an idea, into the Alternative Weekly in Eugene. The community started supporting it. Then you approached Gannet and said, look, the Register-Guard is a shadow of itself. Maybe there's a way financially you can donate it to the university and we take it over here. You actually had conversations with executives. You spoke to Fogarty, correct? You spoke to the people who can pull this switch, and it's you published what happened. The word is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe you can tell us the story. They're making a few shekels with it still, right? So it's hard to give it up. Do I have that right?
Well, that's what happened when I talked to Gannet. Prior to talking to Gannet, I was receiving emails from the community after the op-ed ran, things like, I finally gave up my subscription to the RG because I couldn't take the daily insults to journalistic standards and the lack of any real news. Thank you for sharing your alarm about the demise of local news and for suggesting some positive steps. I am very upset at the Register-Guard or what's left of it. These are the kinds of things that came. So that's when I called Lark Marie Anton in Mike Reed's office and said, I want to talk to Mike Reed. I'll come over to the East Coast, no problem. And she said, well, he's kind of busy. And then she was very gracious. She said, as I'm sure you are as well, which was very nice. And she put me over to Emily Nash, who's the executive vice president there of local news and audience development. That's her title. She was gracious also and suggested some kind of partnership with our school, with our journalism and communication school, and what's left of her paper's newsroom. And that would have meant, my interpretation was, she'd get free labor. So I finally got to Jay Fogarty, and he's in charge of buying and selling newspapers.
He's mergers and acquisitions, right? Go ahead.
He's the M&A guy, and he too was very gracious, and he said, and the candor was refreshing, and he said, the Register-Guard is a paper we plan to own and operate long term. And then he said, I'm all for it, giving it to the university when the paper stops making money.
But there's the operative word, when.
Yes. Exactly.
I'm sorry. The publisher in me, he didn't say if,
No.
he said when it stops
Yeah.
making money.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could go on
And
for
so,
hours. Let's not belabor that. The one thing that you're doing, which I'm sure when you talked to Ken also talked about how he's tying in local students into his operation in Santa Cruz. You're seeing the synergy. But by the way, other legacy brands are being absorbed by different entities. You do know the Chicago Sun-Times was picked up by public radio in Chicago.
of course,
Jennifer
and that's
Coe.
why we are talking also. I got a nice call from Oregon Public Broadcasting, and then I sat down with Eric Newton, an old colleague from the streets of San Francisco, and talked about his work with the Knight Foundation. And so we've got this cabal building that I think that the pivot point is there's nobody left, it seems, to even turn out the lights at the Register-Guard, whereas we have in our journalism school over 2,000 students and some 100 faculty members. Imagine if just 5% of that student body were involved in something like this, you'd immediately have a newsroom with 50 people in it for Eugene. Imagine if just a few of the faculty members were involved, and a professional managing editor and sales manager of some kind. What do you need? You need circulation, you need advertising, and you need an editor. Let those be professionals, and let it be as the hospital, the teaching hospital model for the university, the community, and the newspaper, even if it's not the Register-Guard, even if it becomes something else, Eugene News.
But the beauty is taking the legacy brand and what I call polishing it, bringing it back.
I love that.
That's what we did at ENP, but that's whenever I speak about it or get interviewed about it, I talk about like the Disney years still exist, right? But it's a world of new animations and new worlds. But here's what I really, I look at models like I think a lot of journalism students, and now we're segueing into the environment of the school, okay? I think a lot of journalism students are not learning the business world. Do you follow?
I sure do.
They don't understand what a sustainable business model means. News costs money. News, I mean, look at me, I'm a publisher now. I used to just sell advertising for 20 years. All I did was sell ads and move on. Now I have to actually fulfill them. I have to have content around them. I have to turn this into a viable business. If you accept this challenge, you're teaching the real world of journalism. See, we define at ENP news publishing as three things: creating journalistic content. I know you're teaching that. 2, find an audience for it. 3, monetize it. You get my drift.
You are going to have to come guest lecture in my classes, because we are speaking the same language, more or less. I sit down the first day of my classes and I say, welcome to the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. Here's how we're going to operate this class. It is in parallel structure. I'm the professor and you're the students, and this is the academy, and the other structure is I am the assignment editor, you are the reporters, and we're reporting the news. And so and I'm not alone. My colleagues at the university are also engaged in trying to do exactly what you're saying, inject the real world into the academy. So it's one baby step then to be operating a community newspaper. And this is not.
Why not?
And why not? And it's done. We have these examples elsewhere in the country where universities have taken on a dying or dead newspaper market, and some of them for quite some time, like the Columbia Missourian in Columbia, Missouri, with the University of Missouri,
they were my consulting client. I've been on that campus. I worked with them. They teach business along with journalism. Do you see? There's a business around journalism that we've got to. I mean, and I don't care if it's nonprofit. You haven't maybe taken the journey through all these different programs, but I had Stuart Bainham on this program when we discussed the Baltimore Banner, at the beginning of that. nonprofit to me is just a way of doing your accounting. You've got to be sustainable. You understand? I mean, and you have to have many different revenue. I call the stools, legs on the stool. So I'm excited about this.
This is appreciated in the dying legacy business, where in fact, Jay Fogarty suggested that I look at the Memphian and see how it's competing with the Gannet paper, the commercial appeal. The CA is the legacy paper, and yet there's a competitive reality there. So that is another way we could look at it here. If we decided to go in this direction at the university, we could just put the Register-Guard out of its misery.
Yeah, but then you lose, as you just said, those years and years of archives. You lose that. When I took over EMP, when I first started my due diligence, first thing I looked at open rates of a large email list. Do you understand? Social media sharing. These are the things you could be inheriting rather than building them up from scratch. So I save it, go for it. Polish it up. And I can see this could be huge. I mean, when I saw public broadcasting get involved, I was going, yay. But now, so I'm excited for you. We're going to continue to stay on top of this, Peter, with your permission. And thank you for allowing us to discuss this as you start putting this out to the industry, that we at the University of Oregon have approached Gannet about, I don't want to say save, but I guess you could. We had to take this scuttling brand. So now let me apply this whole logic where you have your students and you're teaching them about journalism and what good journalism is. And I'm assuming you are talking about integrity and sources and all that and more. Then comes this slow news concept, which, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of came to you because I don't remember his name, but I read about it. The director who started the project for you in Italy said he was an assignment editor, or he was doing like 400 assignments a day.
He's turned into a good friend, and it's I still can't believe. I know he's telling the truth. I just can't believe it. But he was in a managerial capacity as an editor, and he had to go through 400 or so pieces a day. And it was in that period of overwhelm that he decided.
But he was applying metrics to why he was going over them. What was the clicks? What was the sharing? Correct? It was all about audience, digital. And then in the video I watched, Slow News, which is on Vimeo. And yes, if you are now listening to this on Spotify or Apple, go back to editorandpublisher.com/vodcast. You'll get a link to the video, the documentary. But Mark Thompson from the New York Times, right? He said this was becoming a downfall for our industry, correct? That if you're spending all your time looking at the clicks, there goes the journalism. Am I doing this right? I mean,
there goes the journalism. But the other side of that, I'm convinced, is there goes the audience too. Because even with, I have to get up and get it, even with something as vacuous as the current, and let me grab one of these here in case.
Go ahead, it's fine with me. We'll just stay here and hum for a bit until you get back. It's okay.
Pardon? I missed that. Sorry.
No, I was just making a joke. Keep going, sir. Okay.
Okay. Well, even with the remnants of as I mentioned in the weekly, it's too thin to even line your bird cage or wrap fish. But if you look at the you can see it, here it is. If you look at this lead, it says UO moves forward with new Portland campus. Now, if this were a traditional kind of clickbait, it would say something like, what's UO doing in Portland? So that you'd have to click past,
of course,
in order to get even this minimal amount of information. But in this heritage environment, we can read that, we know something, and if we don't care to know more, we can go to the comics page and read Rex Morgan. But at least we know something.
Okay, so I just finished reading, I think for the second time, a book I had on Edward R. Murrow, okay? And that era, under Bill Paley. For those of you who don't know who Edward R. Murrow is, shame on you if you're listening to this podcast. I want you to study the era in the 50s of Bill Paley, who was CEO or president of CBS News, a pioneer of the news business. A gentleman by the name of Fred Friendly, I think was his name, was the producer. And Edward R. Murrow was a star on CBS News hosting a show called let me see if I can remember the name of the show now. I think it was This Is Now, and that was a very famous show. And that was one of the things that brought McCarthyism down, that Edward R. Murrow pushed CBS, even though they knew they were going to get tons of pressure from the government and pushback from advertisers or getting pushed at by the government, to take on Joseph McCarthy and the lawyer Roy Cohn. I know who were just pulling off this McCarthyism, which is, in my opinion, was nothing more than, in some cases, anti-Semitism. The blacklist in Hollywood was all Jewish people, if you really want to go down the list. But here's the thing. That show left the air because Bill Paley sat with Edward R. Murrow and said, okay, you're doing great journalism, but no one cares. It's on Tuesday nights, and we're making more money with the $64,000 question. You see what I'm saying? And he pushed that show to a Sunday afternoon dead spot because, I hope I'm not pontificating too much, but it's my show and I can do whatever the hell I want. But he pushed it off the air because, in his opinion, we're just going to give news that people want, not the news they should have. This is the battle that's always been in my brain ever since I ran radio stations and I was running a TV station news department. You know, if it bleeds, it leads, brevity, no deep news. And then I would listen to public broadcasting. What is your take if you say we got to slow down, but the audience doesn't care? Are you creating news that no one's going to read? This is address my square that circle that square, whatever. Go ahead, sir.
Yes. Well, it requires a breath and a look out the window and a contemplation that is trying to push against depression. So we've got this minuscule attention span in our society currently.
Gen Z's 30 seconds.
That's the long. We have we have a rejection of, a repulsion about bad news because it surrounds us. We have a desire for escapism, and we've lost this common curriculum of news. So that same era when the kid was throwing the paper from his red Schwinn, mommy and daddy were watching Huntley Brinkley or Walter Cronkite, and then down at the barbershop, this is the nostalgic look at an America that had ghastly things going on in it at the time, but in terms of some kind of common curriculum of knowledge and news that was not at this accelerated 24-hour, 7-day pace of less than 30 seconds, people, even though all kinds of problems existed with that and stuff was missed, at least there was a core common curriculum of information that was generally shared across the populace.
And accurate information. All news is bias. If a human being, you can't remove those axons and dendrites that make you biased from your upbringing.
Of course not. There is no such thing as objectivity. But
if you do look at the history of news, broadcast, I mean, we're talking broadcast because the government basically said you got to do some public service. So news was considered the public service part of owning the spectrum. Does that make sense? No one looked at monetizing
and there were problems then, and there were problems with accuracy and with prejudice and all sorts of other things. But there was this common curriculum, which is the term that I think works, of information, news information that Americans tended to share. And now, with everything coming from all of these different places, then you've got your 10 seconds of TikTok is news for this guy, and reading Foreign Affairs is news for that gal. What does that mean for if we look back at Eugene as an example, a relatively well-educated, relatively affluent, growing city of a couple of 100,000 with a worldwide known university and a pretty decent football team and a cute mascot. Speaking of Disney, Puddles is the Donald Duck equivalent that Walt himself gave us to use. So what does that mean? It should mean that from my prejudicial standpoint as a journalist and a journalism professor, it should mean that people are fluent with what's going on in the community. And if there isn't a heritage-like outlet, whether it's an ink on paper newspaper or something like what Ken Doctor is doing in Santa Cruz, or some kind of melange, maybe 6 days of screen time and a nice traditional kind of a Sunday paper with color comics that sits around the house for a week. If there isn't that, it's very hard for a community to know what it is, where it's going, what its needs are, because everybody is watching somebody
and you are correct
on TikTok.
There is actually research that we've reported on over and over that when a community loses its voice, let's just call that journalistic voice, the community languishes. People stop voting, corruption ensues. There's a lack of a final check on power. The challenge in our society that I'm seeing is I support the Constitution 1,000%. I always say, and I've said it 100 times in this program, imperfect men wrote a perfect document that's fluid, that people have tried to shred. But the world looks at that document, when we should be, I actually wrote an editorial saying that kids should no longer be saluting the flag. They should be saluting the flag and the Constitution. That one extra word should be said. So people understand it's about not a person, not a piece of land, but a document. Here's the problem. In other cultures where government has a little bit more say in what journalism is, just a little bit more, there seems to be less of the crisis we're having here. Do you see where I'm going with this? Because we have to have a free and unfettered press and freedom of speech, suddenly a blogger with cats on their couch is a journalist who's writing anything they want.
But Mike, we wouldn't want it any other way. And you would not want to be answering to the magazine authority for something you publish in E&P because you felt like publishing it, and some kind of board of overseers felt that you had
crossed the line.
Yes.
See, this is what's bothering me the most, and especially now these echo chambers where people go into a one news environment, as you said, just to feel good. They're not even getting reporting anymore. They're just getting conversation from reporter to reporter to reporter.
For a reinforcement of their own points of view without information.
Right. Where's that searchlight that Scripps has as a logo that's supposed to shine the light on that dark corner?
But in terms of showing off a product, what I say in this book, Slow News, is messes with that responsibility. The onus ultimately, I think, is on us as the news consumer to be demanding. And if the people, and we in the industry rely on people to be consuming our product, if the people who are consuming the product are saying, I need this, I need to know, if using Eugene again as an example, what went on at the city council meeting. I need to know how it was that the city councilor from the River Road area got pushed out by a recall vote. I need to know if the new rapid bus line is going to go up River Road, or whatever they need to know. I need to know who's playing at the Holt Center this Saturday so I can decide if I'm taking my wife out on a date. If that information is demanded, then in our consumer society, one would think that there would then be a product for it. So the onus is on us to be educated journalism consumers and to be demanding journalism consumers. And if you actually back looking for that cat that you talked about, then we're not going to get anything other than this vacuous Register-Guard. Excuse me, Jay Fogarty, but throwing it away in advance.
For those of you listening to this on your podcast, please watch the video. Your visuals have been incredible. Final thought. One of the things I loved, because you're not just writing a book about slow news, you preach it in your classroom. You have asked the kids in your room to turn off their phones, right? I mean, I spoke at 18 conferences. Excuse me?
No, yes. I don't make any demands. I make it clear to the students I'm not a cop and that there's a door there. Anytime they don't like what's going on in the classroom, they can leave. But well, to make this very contemporary, I say no phones. Go out in the corridor if you want to use your phone. No laptops. We're going to be present. Bring a writing implement and a pad of paper.
You want them to write down their thoughts.
That's right. And by the way, wear a mask because I don't want you to make me sick. So yeah, we've got an entertaining combination of the future and the past in my classroom. Come and guest lecture, Mike. It's no longer a request; it's a demand.
All right. So give me some hope. I have a hope and a dream that there's a new breed coming into our industry that's going to help breathe life into journalism, not just want to do social media. And are you seeing that from your student body? Are you seeing people with passion for that final check on power? Oh, he's looking around for another prop, I think.
I just hope it's here. I
go
don't
get it. We'll hum. That's okay. We can.
It might be upstairs, but here's that hope. Let me tell you that hope. A couple of years ago, I walked into an advanced reporting class I had the New York Times, and on page 2, there was a column that was something like, in the past in the Times. That's not what it was called. But there was a story, 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it was about a 1960s 4th grade class. The teacher was advocating the students generate a pen pal relationship with someplace far away. The students looked at the globe and they chose what was then the Soviet Union. And so the teacher had the president of the class, Janice, write to the congressman that was representing Roseburg at the time here in Oregon and ask for help identifying a school where they could find a 4th grade to engage in a pen pal relationship with. Really? This is going right to your question. It's going right to your question. Just stick with me for a moment.
I'm with you, Doc. Go ahead.
Okay. And the congressman went to the State Department. This is the Eisenhower years, and it's the Cold War. The State Department put the kibosh on it and said, we are not helping these kids get in touch with Soviet kids. The poor Oregonian kids are going to be on the receiving end of propaganda. So I took this story and said to my students, find this girl, find Janice, who was 10 years old in 1960. Well, before that hour was over, they found her. She was a pensioner in Las Vegas. And
really?
Over the next, and the reason I was looking over at the bookshelf, over the next several months, these students fanned out and told this story of what happened in 1960, including using Freedom of Information Act requests to get FBI files from the time the FBI took correspondence from the Roseburg school district that had come from Russia. There's not enough time here to tell all of it, except to say to you that resulted in a book published by Anthem Press recently called Classroom 15. Let me see if I can conjure up the subtitle.
I'm going to put a link to it. I'll put a link to it.
How the Hoover FBI dashed the hopes of Oregon 4th graders or something like that. But Classroom 15 is the name of the book. And it is an example of a class of University of Oregon students who didn't just rise to the occasion of that assignment that day, but went on to continue to work together well past the term ended and publish this book. So yes, we are in good hands if you look at an example like that, and we don't have to worry about our free press. We are not living in Singapore, where I just visited my son who's living there, working there now, and there I found a book called Freedom from the Press, which is a great title, but it's about what it's like to live in a society unlike ours, where there is that kind of control. We're in good shape with this up-and-coming generation that you will meet when you come out to guest lecture at the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication, Mike.
Let's leave it at that positive note. Dr. Peter Laufer, PhD, professor of journalism and the James N. Wallace Chair of Journalism, University of Oregon, obviously the author of the book we explored in our January issue of Editor and Publisher magazine, Slow News, a manifesto for the critical news consumer, and also Butterfly and Turtle Chaser, which is another issue altogether. Doc, I will come out because I told you during our exchange, I have family in the Pacific Northwest. My brother owns a house there, and my niece is an ER physician. Pamplin Newspapers was a client of mine for years. I've been out there. I wish you well, and this is the first, I hope, of many interviews on this platform. Thank you, Doc.
And thank you. It's a pleasure talking with you, meeting you, and it makes me so happy that E&P continues to thrive.